And welcome, everyone, to our Local 5 Digital Election Special. I'm Kris Schuller. Joining me this evening is George Waller, who's a political science professor at UW-Fox Valley. Now, the polls closed just about a half hour ago, and we're waiting for some returns to come in for this midterm election. But, George, I have to tell you, this really doesn't feel like a normal midterm. It almost feels like it's a presidential race. Do you agree with that?
Well, certainly I think, midterms are always sort of a referendum on whoever occupies the White House. Yeah. And particularly this year, I think Donald Trump, by his own admission, has sort of made it a kind of referendum on his presidency and on the themes that he's been sort of touting as he's traveled across the country.
You know, some of the things that kind of remind me of it being a presidential type election. All the ex-presidents coming to the area, all the candidates connected to the parties getting together and using that to try and gain some support. I mean, there's been a lot of hype with this midterm.
Yeah, I think on both sides. I think both Republicans and Democrats felt that the stakes were really high in this midterm election, that there was a real possibility, and there may still be a possibility, that Democrats may take the House. And while it's much longer odds that they could take it in the Senate, they at least felt they could be competitive in at least holding off Republican gains in the Senate. So I think both sides felt that there was a lot to potentially be gained.
All right, let's talk about some of the things today. Heavy turnout, absentee voting, yeah. Record numbers. Over 500,000 ballots returned as of Monday. What does this signal? I mean, are people angry? Are people just eager to keep their candidate in office? What?
I think it's a combination of all of those things. I think there are some voters who are very angry. I think there are some voters who are angry at President Trump. I think there are elements of Trump's base that are angry at what they felt Democrats did, for example, in the Kavanaugh hearings. So I think there's a lot of that, and I think there's a lot of energy that's sort of enthusing voters to get out and support their particular candidates on both the Republican and Democratic sides.
President Trump obviously is not on the ballot, but many of his Republican supporters are. So, I'm just curious, how likely do you think it is that there are people who are actually going out to vote in support of the president and his agenda, or on the flip side, in opposition to?
I think there was a lot of suggestion from the early exit polls that a lot of people were out there either in opposition to Trump or supportive of Trump. But then there were also a significant number of people who felt that Trump really wasn't the issue, that it was really about the issues in the local races and the local places where candidates were running on those more local issues.
Well, let's take a look at the race for governor.
Yeah.
The Marquette Law School poll showed the two candidates, the incumbent, Scott Walker, and the challenger here, Tony Evers, tied entering today's election. So was that expected for you? Did you expect that to happen?
You know, Scott Walker, you know, he's running for a third term. It's obviously a more challenging kind of environment for Scott Walker here in 2018. I think, you know, he admittedly says that he's facing the challenge of his political career. Right. And I think Tony Evers and the Democratic side was energized to potentially take that governorship away from Scott Walker. So we'll see how things turn out tonight, but I expect it to be very close.
You know, both of the candidates talked about education, the economy, taxes, infrastructure, both with different viewpoints on either side of the issue. But the one issue that seemed to just get pounded away towards the end of this election was health care.
You bet.
And help me out.
Yeah, well, you know, it was. I mean, you had Scott Walker and Brad Schimmel filing a lawsuit essentially to eliminate some of the provisions of Obamacare, particularly the one that was the most important.
Pre-existing conditions, that's what I was trying to spit out, but I didn't do it.
And I think that's something that Evers and the Democrats hammered them on, and you actually saw that Scott Walker and Republicans were saying, no, we're going to protect pre-existing conditions. And so there was a sort of back and forth on something that really, I think, hits home with a lot of folks here in Wisconsin.
And here I think we're seeing some numbers that are coming in.
8%.
Yeah, the incumbent, the governor ahead right now at 8%. But.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see where those are coming from. That's still a small number. So again, we're seeing the same reflected on the Attorney General race here. Still, I think it's way too early to know exactly where these returns are coming from and how they're going to eventually play out.
Demographically speaking, who needed to go to the polls? I mean, did someone need to go to the polls to help either candidate win, and where?
Definitely, I think women were energized to show up. Will be interesting to see whether they did turn out in record numbers, and young people as well were the ones that I think Democrats were counting on. Women, young people, and obviously I think the Republicans were counting on the Republican base. I mean, Scott Walker and Republicans here in the state of Wisconsin have built a very strong base and have a very good turnout effort, and that's done them well in the past, and I think we'll see whether that continues tonight.
You know, the governor's ahead early here, but I'm curious about Foxconn. Was that a liability for the governor?
You know, I think, you know, it depends on who you talk to.
Sure.
Obviously, for those on the Democratic side, they felt it was a real liability, that the state gave way too much away and got much less than was bargained for in return, certainly less than was originally promised. I think it was, to some extent, even a liability for the Republican side. You notice Scott Walker didn't talk a whole lot about Foxconn.
Right.
None of the Republicans talked a whole lot about Foxconn.
Didn't.
I think, you know, they felt that that was a potential weak spot in the campaign and didn't want to concentrate lots of time on it.
And that's another point I was going to ask you next. I mean, you say the other Republicans didn't talk about it, and they did not because it was an unknown quality.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think a lot of people are sort of second guessing as to whether that really was the good deal that it was originally touted to be.
All right, lots of talk about this blue wave. Democrats working hard to overtake existing Republican majorities in the House and the Senate. Can you explain that? And also, are we likely to see something like that happen tonight? You
know, the idea of a wave election is something that's very, very difficult, particularly this year, given on the Senate side, the Senate map. I mean, with with Democrats having to defend Senate seats in 10 states that went big for Donald Trump, it was rather problematic that Democrats could think that they could hold on to all 10 of those seats. We've already seen Mike Donnelly lost in in Indiana as one of those that was a clearly Trump territory, and it didn't work. There's still likely a distinct possibility that Democrats can take the majority in the House. But the idea of a wave election seems to always be a little bit more on the hopeful side and a little bit less likely to occur in reality. Lots of things have to come together for a wave election to actually occur.
You talked about the House, I do believe.
Yes.
And people say it could happen in the Senate, but that's doubtful?
I think at this point, especially with Donnelly's loss in Indiana, that's a flip to the Republicans. And we also know Marsha Blackburn won in Tennessee. There were hopes on the Democratic side that Phil Bredesen could be competitive there. That's not going to happen. We still see that Florida's Senate election between Rick Scott and Bill Nelson is neck and neck. You got Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota yet to face, to see whether she can return. Claire McCaskill in Missouri, and those are states that are Trump states. And if the Trump base turned out, it's going to be problematic for Democrats to hold those seats, which will end up then a greater Republican majority. In the Senate.
Since we're on the topic, let's look at the state legislature.
Yeah.
Assembly, well, that's going to remain.
It will. Yes,
staunchly Republican.
It will.
The Senate there, I mean, my understanding are there are 5 seats that they go either way. It could.
Right. And I think Democrats need to flip 2 of those in order to take control in the state Senate. I think that many Democrats were hoping and are still hoping on the race here, Caleb Frostman against Andre Jacques. That might be one. That would be a Democratic seat. Don't know where else they might hope to pick one up. Lee Snodgrass is probably not going to win against Roger Roth in the Appleton area, which was one that Democrats had some hope for.
Right.
So it's going to be difficult.
All right. And real quickly, in 15 seconds, as we move forward tonight, what are you going to be looking for?
Well, I'm going to continue to look at what's happening in those House races, and I'm going to look at those Senate races out west, look at what happens in Missouri, look at what happens in North Dakota, look at the governor's race, obviously, here in Wisconsin. We may be up very late. We may not know until a while from now what's happening there.
All right. Well, we thank you for your insight, and that does it for this Local 5 digital election special. We'll be back here in the digital world with a look at the U.S. Senate and congressional races in about 20 minutes. Thanks.